There are moments in a baseball game that stop time. Not the kind of stop that comes from a walk-off home run or a diving catch in the gap. The kind that comes from something happening on the field that nobody in the stadium, not the players, not the coaches, not the 40,000 people in the seats, was prepared to see. The kind of stop where the crowd noise doesn't build. It just cuts. Like someone pulled a wire from the wall. That is what happened in the sixth inning at Citizens Bank Park. And at the center of it, standing at the edge of the infield dirt with his hands at his sides and his eyes fixed on something that the cameras were still trying to find, was Shohei Ohtani. The game up until that point had been the kind of tight, grinding contest that late May matchups between contenders tend to produce. Neither team was giving anything away. Every at-bat felt negotiated rather than played. Every pitch selection was being debated in dugouts and press boxes and living rooms across the country. The Phillies shortstop, Edmundo Sosa, had been one of the quieter presences on the field through the first 5 innings. He had done his job. He had made his plays. He had taken his at-bats without drawing attention to himself in any particular direction. Then the 6th inning arrived. And something changed. Ohtani had been in the batter's box for 3 pitches when it happened. The count was 1-1. He had fouled off the second pitch, a breaking ball that caught more of the plate than the pitcher intended, and stepped out briefly to reset. He stepped back in. He looked out at the mound. What happened next unfolded in approximately 4 seconds. Sosa, positioned at shortstop, moved. Not toward the ball. Not toward a base. He moved in a direction that had no baseball explanation attached to it. Toward Ohtani. The motion was short but it was sharp and it was deliberate, and the home plate umpire saw it from 12 feet away before most of the people in the stadium understood what they were watching. The umpire's voice came before his arm did. Then his arm came. And Sosa was gone. But the ejection was not the moment that defined the next 72 hours of baseball conversation. The moment that defined it came 30 seconds later. Because when the umpire signaled for Sosa to leave the field, and when the crew chief walked toward the shortstop to manage the situation, something about Sosa's bat became the center of attention in a way that nobody in the ballpark had anticipated. The umpire reached for it. Not a figurative reach. A literal one. He took the bat from Sosa's hands, or rather, he directed that the bat be surrendered and confiscated from the field, which in the language of baseball officiating is not a routine thing. Bats get checked. Bats get inspected for cork. Bats get measured and weighed in the quiet procedural language of rule enforcement. Bats do not get confiscated from an ejected shortstop in the 6th inning of a game in May because of something that happened near the batter's box. Not unless something serious had just occurred. The Dodgers' dugout was standing. Not the kind of standing that happens when a teammate hits a long ball. Every person in that dugout was on the top step, and the expressions on their faces were not the expressions of men watching baseball. MLB's statement came before midnight. It was longer than most statements the league issues mid-series. It used the phrase "full investigation" 3 times in 4 paragraphs. It confirmed that Sosa had been ejected for dangerous play and violent conduct in the vicinity of a player. It confirmed that the bat had been retained for examination as part of the investigation. It confirmed that additional disciplinary measures were under review and that the timeline for those measures would be determined by the findings of the investigation. It did not describe exactly what Sosa had done in those 4 seconds. It didn't need to. The footage had already been seen by everyone who needed to see it. The Phillies press conference that night had the atmosphere of a room where something difficult was about to happen and everyone in it knew it. Their manager, Rob Thomson, walked in with the carefully neutral expression that experienced managers wear when they have already decided what they will and will not say. He sat down. He adjusted the microphone. He took a small sip of water. The first question came quickly. "What is your response to the incident involving Sosa in the 6th inning?" Thomson nodded slowly. He had been expecting that question since the moment the umpire's arm went up on the field. He said Sosa was a professional. He said the organization was cooperating fully with the league's investigation. He said he trusted the process. Then came the follow-up that changed everything about the press conference. A reporter, sitting in the third row, asked Thompson directly whether he believed Ohtani's behavior at the plate had contributed to the situation escalating the way it did. The room went quiet in a different way than rooms usually go quiet. Thompson didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table. He looked back up. And then he said something that baseball Twitter would spend the next 18 hours dissecting word by word. He said that Ohtani was a great player. He acknowledged that without hesitation. But he also said, and this is the part that landed hard, that great players sometimes draw situations to themselves. That the attention Ohtani commands at the plate is unlike anything else in the game right now. And that sometimes that attention creates friction that nobody intended but everyone has to manage. He stopped there. But stopping there was already too far. The reaction was immediate. Former players didn't wait for morning to respond. They responded from phones and laptops and television studios within the hour. The language they used was not restrained. Words like disgraceful and deflection and accountability appeared in quick succession across every platform where baseball people say things in public. The Players Association, which had already issued one statement about Ohtani in recent days, issued another. This one was shorter. It said the association rejected any attempt to shift responsibility for dangerous conduct onto the player who had been endangered by it. It said the suggestion was contrary to the values of the sport. It said it expected the league's investigation to reflect those values. 4 sentences. No hedging. No diplomatic softening around the edges. Just 4 sentences that said exactly what they meant. Dave Roberts walked into the Dodgers press conference room after the game with a win behind him. The Dodgers had held on. The bullpen had done what the Dodgers bullpen does in tight situations. The scoreboard, when the final out was recorded, favored Los Angeles. But Roberts did not enter that room like a man who had just won a baseball game. He entered it like a man who had watched something happen to one of his players that he was still in the process of understanding. He sat down. He looked out at the reporters. And before anyone could ask the first question, he spoke. He said he wanted to address something directly. The room leaned in. Roberts said he had been in this game for a long time. He said he had managed through difficult situations, controversial situations, situations where emotions ran higher than they should have on a baseball field. He said none of that had prepared him for the 6th inning. Then he said the thing that stunned the reporters sitting in front of him and the Phillies personnel standing in the back of the room and the millions of people who would watch the clip within the next several hours. He said he had personally walked Ohtani to the opposing team's dugout after the incident. Not to the Dodgers' dugout. Not back to the safety of his own team's space. To the Phillies' dugout. Because the situation on the field had become confused enough, and the response from the Phillies side of the diamond had been disoriented enough, that in the immediate aftermath Roberts had physically guided Ohtani in a direction that made no sense from the outside, a direction that only made sense if you understood how chaotic those 90 seconds had actually been. A reporter said, "You walked him to the wrong dugout?" Roberts said, "I walked him to where I thought was the safest place in that moment. I was wrong about which dugout that was. We got him back quickly. But yes." For about 30 seconds, Shohei Ohtani was standing in the Phillies' dugout. The room did not know what to do with that information for a moment. Neither did the Phillies personnel standing in the back of it. What those 30 seconds looked like, Ohtani, the most recognized player in baseball, standing in the dugout of the team whose shortstop had just been ejected for dangerous conduct toward him, is the kind of image that requires very little additional commentary to land with full force. He stood there. He looked around. He was calm, according to 2 people who were present in that dugout and spoke to reporters later, in the way that Ohtani is always calm. He didn't react. He didn't speak. He simply stood there until a Dodgers coach came to collect him and walked him back across the field. 30 seconds. In a game full of moments, that was the one that nobody had a category for. The Phillies clubhouse was closed to media for longer than usual after the game. When players did emerge, most of them said very little about the incident. One veteran infielder said only that the team supported the league's investigation and would let the process do its work. A pitcher said he hadn't had a clear sight line to what happened and didn't want to speak to something he hadn't seen directly. Sosa himself did not appear for media availability. His absence said more than most of the words that were spoken that night. By the following morning, the conversation had moved in two directions simultaneously. The first direction was the investigation itself. What exactly had Sosa done? What would the examination of the bat reveal? What did the league's findings mean for his availability going forward and the Phillies' roster construction in a pennant race that was already tighter than they had anticipated? The second direction was Thomson's comments. The suggestion that Ohtani had somehow drawn the situation to himself. That greatness creates friction. That friction is a shared responsibility. That second direction produced more heat than the first. Because baseball is a sport that has, over many years and many difficult conversations, arrived at a relatively clear position on what it means when a manager suggests that a player who was endangered should examine his own role in the danger. The sport does not accept that position. It has said so clearly in language and in policy and in the kind of swift institutional response that the league office demonstrated with its midnight statement. Thomson would walk his comments back partially by the following afternoon. He issued a clarifying statement through the team. It said he had not intended to suggest that Ohtani bore any responsibility for Sosa's conduct. It said he had enormous respect for Ohtani as a competitor and as a person. It said his words had not accurately reflected his meaning. The clarification was noted. But the words were already out. And in a situation this serious, with a player this significant, words that have already left the room do not come back simply because the person who said them decides they should. Ohtani's statement, released through his interpreter the morning after, was brief. He said he was okay. He said he trusted the league to handle the situation appropriately. He said he was focused on the next game. 4 sentences. The same number the Players Association had used. And in those 4 sentences was the thing about Ohtani that baseball keeps discovering every time it thinks it has fully understood him. He does not perform outrage. He does not position himself for sympathy. He does not use moments like these to make himself larger than the game. He simply says he is focused on the next game. And then he goes out and plays it. The investigation continues. The bat is in the possession of the league office. The suspension timeline remains indefinite. And somewhere in a visiting clubhouse after a game that ended the way it did, Dave Roberts sat alone for a few minutes before the reporters came in. What he was thinking in those minutes is not something he shared publicly. But he had just watched his player stand in the wrong dugout for 30 seconds. And he had just said something in a press conference that stunned the people who heard it in real time. In a season full of stories, this one was not finished.